Georgia and South Carolina played a close one until it wasn't. And of course, I want to get into that. Obviously, Georgia being the number one team in the nation, Georgia being the back-to-back national champions looking to go for the three-peat. And they play an ugly one. They pull it out 24-14. They're now 3-0 on the year, still the number one team in the nation, thankfully, as a Dogs fan and as everyone watching you. You want to see the Dogs continue to do well, right? But the Dogs stumble early on. Then they really dominate that second half behind some work from Carson Beck. And they held off South Carolina. South Carolina was going for a big upset bid here. Stormed back in the second half from an 11-point deficit. Obviously, talking about the Dogs here, we take control of the game for the rest of the way. And it really wasn't pretty for the Dogs in their SEC opener, right? But every single win counts in the standings, no matter how you come across them. And we know that's what matters in college football. One loss, you're sweating. Two losses, you're probably assuming you're not even in the playoffs, right? But it was not an easy win. The Dogs were favored by 4 touchdowns before this game, and they did not look like the number one team in the nation throughout this game. South Carolina opens up, punches them in the mouth, 10 plays, 65-yard touchdown drive. That really kind of proved costly because it was a score in this game that the Dogs had to worry about and ultimately overcome. He had Antoine Wells, who caught a 17-yard touchdown pass from Spencer Rattler that ended the drive. Unfortunately, Antoine Wells' day came to an end as well. He suffered a foot injury that knocked him out of the game. And you could really say with Spencer Rattler connecting with him, if they would have still had him in the game, the Dogs could be asking themselves of, hey, would have this been possibly closer than 24-14? But, Georgia didn't have much trouble moving the ball in the first half, but the issue was stalling out in the red zone. Georgia had a before halftime. Now, clearly, Georgia came out in the second half. They adjusted. They literally, in the second half, 21-0 run. And the defense came and did what they did. The offense stood up, scored the 21 unanswered points in the second half. Obviously, Kirby Smart wants to see them play better, but the Dogs score on the first 2 possessions of the second half, while the defense absolutely smothered South Carolina in the second half, obviously opening it up. Georgia took that 24-14 lead midway through the third quarter and clearly just never turned around and looked back. Now, South Carolina did have that chance to really make it a game again, but the Gamecocks offense only ran 2 plays in Georgia territory during the second half. Again, a testament to that best defense, arguably, or without a question, it's a fact in college football. And they even failed to get past Georgia's 44-yard line. They literally got 6 plays into plus territory, and it just couldn't make it happen anymore. Carson Beck throws for 269, while the Dogs, they have Dejan Edwards led the way on the ground again, 118 yards and a score. So the Dogs are definitely getting some production out of Dejan Edwards. You really love to see what he's doing for the team so far. Now, the reason that, and we kind of saw just a little bit these red zone issues with Georgia against UT Martin, against Ball State. And when you win those 2 combined games with a score of 93-10, like you're not really that concerned, right? It's the number one team in the nation. First 2 weeks of the year, like again, 93-10 for a total margin of victory. But after those games, the Dogs were 81st in the nation in red zone touchdown efficiency at 60%, which 60% is still solid. 6 out of every 10 times you're going to the red zone. Now, maybe you wanted about 7 or 8 times. Of course, you wanted to be 100%. The red zone, that's the money downs. What are you doing inside the 20? What are you doing on 3rd and 4th down, especially on 4th down if you're going for it? But then you look today, Georgia, or not today, but in the game, Georgia struggles in the red zone. They reached the red zone 6 times on 9 possessions, not even counting the end of half possessions that they had that were really cut short. They only get 24 points in 6 trips, finished with 3 touchdowns, a field goal, and 2 missed kicks. So Georgia really could have won this game comfortably with a point swing of about another 12 points here. 6 points for a touchdown and the 2 field goals go in. That's a 12-point swing there. So we're possibly talking about a 36-14 win, kind of like we saw Colorado over Nebraska. But when you look at Georgia is different this year. Like college football is different this year. Like we got Florida State, who we're talking about next here on the show, against Boston College, Jordan Travis. Like we've got a lot of teams in college football this year that are going to come to play. They've got talent. They've got quarterbacks that are better than ours. They've got arguably offensive players that are better than ours that could go higher in the draft. When you cannot take advantage of finishing drives and letting a team like South Carolina hang around, you don't want to see that happen. And at times, the defense was too much for the Gamecocks to overcome. But what happens if someone like Florida State or Ole Miss or Tennessee does finish those drives? Excuse me, not Florida State. Auburn, Ole Miss, Tennessee, finishing drives later in the season. Now, of course, Tennessee, loses to Florida. And then if the Dogs are struggling to still do that, that's not going to be a recipe for success. That's not a recipe to get the three-peat going. And we understand that Ladd McConkey hasn't played in 3 games. Javon Pollard dressed out, but he didn't play. They're still relying on walk-ons like Cash Jones, who has been playing well. Kendall Milton sat most of the second half with a knee injury. He had 7 carries for 25 yards. Oh, yeah, and then before halftime, you have the starting tackle, limping to the locker room before showing up on crutches during the second half. So Georgia definitely lost key players in this game. It's not like they were at full-fledged force, especially not having Ladd McConkey, who is a very key piece of this offense. We saw what he did as he came onto the scene last year, but they do have a good bit of depth on the roster, and that is a testament to their recruiting. When you look at their recruiting and what they realistically did, there's a reason that Kirby Smart is very highly touted. There's a reason that Georgia is in the running for 3 championships in a row. And there's the thing, Georgia's probably going to be fine anyways, right? We see them do this last year to Mizzou before we beat them. We've seen Georgia struggle to South Carolina literally 4 years ago. Jake Fromm is the quarterback. I think in his second or third year, we're literally missing kicks against South Carolina. We didn't win the national championship this year, if I'm not mistaken. But we've seen Georgia just fall flat, miss kicks, let a shitty team like South Carolina hang around. They're due for one of these every season or every other season. The annual trap game, apparently, that Deion Sanders doesn't believe in. But you want to see Georgia play better. They're capable of playing better. They're the number 1 team in the country for a reason. And then I got to give a little bit of credit to Spencer Rattler, right? Like, he's doing what he can out here, connecting with Wells, 14-3 at halftime. Spencer Rattler making a little bit of plays. Like, can the Georgia defense really hold things up? And, ultimately just can the Georgia defense really hold things up, which of course they end up doing, and obviously, win this football game. But you look at South Carolina's offensive line just before we get into to FSU and Boston College. They lost their starting tackles before the season, came into Saturday allowing 11 and a half tackles for loss per game. You're getting 3 tackles for loss, and some of those that could be a sack per quarter. 3 tackles for loss. They're averaging 11 and a half tackles for loss per game. That's the worst mark in the nation, and it's not going to improve much after Georgia finished with 7 tackles for loss and 3 sacks on the day. I don't know if sacks count for tackle for loss. I'm sure they do. Like, TFL is kind of a broad category, and then sacks go inside that. Riddler, LOL. Speaking of Desmond Ritter, Spencer Rattler, Riddler. Rattler dropped back to pass 42 times and took shots on at least half of them. Time after time, he stood in the pocket as a future NFL player in a Georgia uniform, literally got there for the pressure, for the sack, for the quarterback knockdown. And it was just ultimately too much for Spencer Rattler to overcome. But you guys get in the chat, get in the comments, let me know what you think of Georgia playing a close one to South Carolina. Is it really a trap game? What was Georgia actually able to do here? 584 subs. Shout out to the lady, the future wifey, letting us know what the sub count is. Let's get to 600 subs on the show. We've got the goal of 600 subs on the NFL with AJL. Steve says, don't think Georgia's going to win the championship without Bennett. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Stetson Bennett, since I know you brought this up earlier. Stetson Bennett absolutely stepped up in the national championship and in the SEC title game, in which Georgia did beat Alabama, I want to say in the second year, yes, to get to the national championship. Stetson Bennett looked great in preseason week 1. He is battling a shoulder injury right now with the Rams. But Stetson Bennett, in the last 2 weeks of preseason, looked horrible. Sean McVay rips the Band-Aid off. Obviously, Stetson Bennett's, really looking the best out of the rookie quarterbacks earlier on. Like, he was up there with Anthony Richardson on, damn, this guy can actually play again preseason. Week 2, horrible. Week 3, I don't even think he plays, if I'm not mistaken. So it is very possible to say that they could lose it without Stetson Bennett. But, I mean, I don't know if we can sit here and say, considering everything Georgia lost, if Stetson Bennett was really enough of a, if Stetson Bennett was really enough of a factor to say that they can't win the championship without him.